Good evening. You are joining with another edition of Diplomatic Paces. Today we have a very special and experienced ambassador from Europe, His Excellency Thorbjørn Gautsaseter, the ambassador of Norway to Sri Lanka and the Maldives. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Your Excellency, what called you to work in the foreign service?
Situation like this? No. I think it started actually when I was a student, when I had a lot of interest for international development and took an interest in some of the emerging states that came up in the world. So I would like to work a little bit with international development, and then that led me to seek an international career. Yeah. I started after my student years. I started with a short spell in a research institution dealing with international development. Then I had 3 years as a professional officer in the United Nations. I worked in Malawi in Africa. And then I joined the Agency for International Development, NORAD, for a number of years. And then in the 90s, I started as a deputy head of the Norwegian Embassy in Lusaka in Zambia, in Africa again. And from there I also been posted as ambassador to Mozambique and to Uganda and now to Sri Lanka.
What are the greatest challenges of working in the foreign service?
I think on the personal level is the fact that you are away from your relatives and family and friends. You are most of the time outside your own country, so that put a little bit of stress on your relationship with your closest ones. Professionally, I think it's, of course there are many things, but there is this balance between adapting to a new country, a new culture, a new way of doing things, and at the same time maintaining the Norwegian policy and a Norwegian interest. So you have to strike a balance between your own country's interest and your host country's interest and background. But it's also that's what makes it interesting, because you have to find this balance between what Norway think is important and what countries like Sri Lanka think is important, and how we can find a common ground.
As an ambassador, what are your day-to-day responsibilities? What does your average work look like?
There are, of course, days are not necessarily the same every day, but normally of course we have internal meetings where we do planning our activities for the day or for the week and for the month. There's 7 times per week, both in the management but also with all staff. Of course, we are also supposed to be there out in society, so we are trying to meet Sri Lankan institutions, civil society, businesses and government officials, trying to both understand policies and interests, and also trying to promote Norwegian interests. And of course, evenings, very often there are functions with colleagues from the diplomatic corps, with officials of Sri Lanka, and of course also businesses. So sometimes it's a long day.
How does working in Sri Lanka compare to your overseas postings?
It's always difficult to compare, because all countries are different. Every country is unique, and you need to sort of find out the way of doing things in each and every country. But since I'm worked mostly in Africa, I did find it very interesting to come to Sri Lanka, because it's my first Asian posting. And of course there are differences between Asian and some African countries when it comes to culture and so on. I think what is interesting here, and particularly for a Norwegian, is that you are also a country with a coastline. We are both coastal nations, which I do find interesting, because we can see how we can pull on experiences from my own country to Sri Lanka and see how we can find a common ground. I think I do find stimulating.
Your Excellency, Sri Lanka and Norway have diplomatic relations over 60 years since 1950. It has culminated with the visit of Norwegian Prime Minister Erna Solberg in 2016 to Sri Lanka. How do you elaborate on this?
First of all, it is a clear indication that we have been together with Sri Lanka for many years. It also, throughout these years, we have had numbers of various cooperation. It started actually as development cooperations in the 60s, and we had a lot of programs in the south, in Hambantota, in Monaragla, assisting rural communities. And of course we were also involved in some of the peace efforts in Sri Lanka in the late 90s or 2000. But what I think we can say is that in last year we had a really interesting year, because this was a very active year between the two countries, a lot of political visits. So I think we entered into a new area of cooperation with the fact that we had both the foreign minister from Norway coming here, the foreign minister for Sri Lanka and the fisheries minister for Sri Lanka came to Norway. And as you said, our prime minister came here in August last year and had meetings at various levels. So I think we have reached an area where we have expanded our relationship, and which we hope to build on. We hope to continue political visits, but we also hope to continue to have interaction with Sri Lanka and various levels in terms of institutions, universities, businesses, and so on. So I think it has gone from strength to strength, although there have been differences now and then, but in general, over the 60 years, we have really had a growing relationship. You are actually in a unique position that you can have preferential treatment to European countries. You can also maybe in the future have preferential treatment for countries in the Asian region. So it's for you to develop your industry and your export base so you can capitalize on this. You need to, of course, there's tough competition out there, so you need really to be competitive, you have to be efficient, and you have to have a marketable product, and it has to be of certain qualities and so on. But with your experience in the past, from your export from rubber to apparel to tea, I think you will also be able to manage to take advantage of this. So I just wanted to encourage you to sort of develop your products, diversify your exports, and try to make the best out of it.
Are there any priority areas that you have recognized to further expand relations with Sri Lanka?
Yeah, we have, as I said, one thing which is in common. We are both coastal nations. So we are already assisting Sri Lanka with some advice on fisheries policy. We are also hoping to see some more commercial cooperation in fisheries. We hope to see more commercial cooperation in the maritime sector. There are now discussions in Sri Lanka to make the shipping industry and maritime industry more open and competitive, which is an interest for Norway. We have, of course, expertise in energy, renewable energy. So at the moment when Sri Lanka is ready for more solar power, wind power, and so on, we will be happy to see whether we can have an opportunity of cooperation there. And on the political level, I think since we are both small nations in the world, we have a lot of common in the interest of having a strong United Nations. We would like to have a strong international order when it comes to rule at sea, and also how we can defend our interests as small countries. So I see a lot of scope for Sri Lanka and also to cooperate in the United Nations, be it on human rights, be it on law at the sea, and a number of other things which are important as we are part of the huge global community.
Your Excellency, what do you believe is the best happening in the northern and the eastern part of the country? And where do you see the room for improvement?
The best thing, of course, is that there is peace. And there is also freedom of movement, there's freedom of speech. That benefits all Sri Lankans. And I also see things are happening in the north. There are some economic activities going on. We are trying to assist to develop some market possibilities for fishing communities, agricultural communities, so they can access to processing and export. And I see that gives a lot of hope to people. So I think what is maybe most important for people in the north is to have security for the land, and also maybe to know a little bit what happened to their relatives during the war. So the Office of the Missing Persons should definitely be something that should be encouraged to be established. It's already approved, but it needs to be established. So I would say that if Sri Lanka can continue to strengthen these things that are very important to the daily life of people, that will help. And of course there is also a strong desire to have a constitutional reform concluded. But there are things are on the right track. It's a question of also now getting things moving a little bit ahead.
Sri Lanka and Norway have huge potential to develop in the field of tourism. How do you seek the opportunities?
Yes, there are. There is also possibility for Sri Lankans to come to Norway because we have an interest in seeing visitors coming to see our, which I think is also a beautiful country. It's different climate, but it has a lot to show you in terms of scenery and beautiful nature. But when it comes to Norwegians coming to Sri Lanka, it has already increased. We have seen a substantial increase over the last 2 years. I see now that more or less every week in the newspapers in Norway you see adverts of companies who would like to sell trips to Sri Lanka. I think it's, and you are all doing a lot in your country to develop the tourism sector. Norwegians and Scandinavians in particular are of course very much interested in activities, so they don't necessarily like to stay at the beach for 2 weeks only. They would like to have some action and activity. So in order to make them happy, there should be also possibilities of see how they can tour around the country and different activities and so on. So I think it's a question of marketing. It's a question of also making Sri Lanka more known in Norway in that sense. But you have the beauty of the country, you have the beaches, you have the nature. But I would also encourage Sri Lanka to, in the tourist destination, to make sure that there are different things to do, because Norwegians don't necessarily like to stay in the hotel the whole time. There should be restaurants around, there should be other things to see. So I think there is, and with your climate and the cold winters, it's only to come here from October, November, December to March, April, when it's cold in our country. So I hope I see that actually increasing, and I think it's just a question of time. We will see much more Norwegians coming.
Your Excellency, Norway has advanced technology in the field of fisheries. As the government of Norway, how can Norway involve in the upliftment of Sri Lankan fisheries?
What we can do is, of course, advise a little bit on how we have structured our fishing industry. For Sri Lanka, I think it's important for the fishermen to invest in new technology, bigger boats, so you can further offshore, improving the quality, export quality. These are the things we can advise on. But ultimately it has to be the Sri Lankan fisherman who has to make sure that he or she does the investments and improve the equipment and the quality.
Before I ask you the final question, would you like to share anything which hasn't been discussed during the discussion?
I think it has been, from what I have said so far, we would like to have an extensive relationship with Sri Lanka, and I think there are many countries in the world that would like to have an interaction with Sri Lanka, and I think also it's important for Sri Lanka to open up to the world. If I should give an example for Norway, we have had a very open economy for many years, and that has also driven our development, driven our welfare state. So being here in the middle of South Asia, I think you should definitely open up to the impulses and the investments from abroad, so you can benefit from competences and capacities elsewhere. and at the same time develop your own competence so you could be competitive and so on. But stay interactive with the global world, but do it on, of course, on your own terms.
Lastly, do you have any word of advice for someone who is interested in joining foreign service?
I think you have to be curious. You have to have an interest for other cultures. You have to be humble, because you have to be able to sort of listen and not. There's a reason which I think is good, that we have 2 eyes and 2 ears and 1 mouth. So we should see and hear more than we talk. So I think there's always, but when you have something to say, you should say it.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for joining with the program, and we wish you all the best in the future endeavors. And thank you very much for watching. Join with us another edition of Diplomatic Faces. Good night.